with a whisper. Not the kind you hear out loud, but the kind that curls around the back of your neck when no one's looking. The kind that makes you pause, even when everything around you is moving just fine. You ever find yourself doing something, and right in the middle of it, you ask yourself, how did I even get here? Yeah, this is one of those stories. They wanted to watch. And we let them. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I do. And if you would have told me years ago that I'd ever be in a moment like that, where eyes lingered too long, where the air felt too thick, where glances said more than words ever could, I would have laughed. Laughed and shut the door on the thought. But the thing is, when you feel unseen for long enough, when the person who used to look at you like you were the only light in the room starts looking at their phone more than your face, you start to crave something. Anything. Just to be noticed again. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was just tired. Tired of folding laundry while my heart stayed wrinkled. Tired of setting dinner plates for someone who barely looked up to say thank you. Tired of sleeping next to a man who felt miles away, even when his body was right beside mine. And then they moved in. The couple next door. Jake and Lila. Young, bold, a little too friendly. The kind of people who smile with their whole face and hold eye contact just a second too long. I didn't notice it at first. Or maybe I did, but I told myself I didn't. Because it's easier to pretend you don't see what you're starving for than admit you've been starving at all. It started off innocent. Drinks on the patio. A few laughs. A neighborly game night. But then there was this one night. The wine was flowing. The jokes were getting looser. And Lila leaned in close and said, "Sometimes it's more fun just to watch." I remember blinking slowly, half trying to laugh it off and half trying to read between every word she didn't say. I looked at my husband, expecting him to laugh it off too. But he didn't. He just smiled. A slow, crooked smile I hadn't seen in months. And that's when I knew something was shifting. Now, I don't expect you to understand all of this right away. Most people won't. Most people live in the black and white, right or wrong, yes or no, stay or leave. But real life? Real life is built in the gray. And that night, that moment, was the first time in a long time that I felt like someone really saw me. Not just my body, but my ache, my absence, my slow fade into invisibility. 2 years have passed, and I still replay that night like it's stitched into my skin. Not because I'm proud of what we did, but because I still don't know who I was in that moment. Was I a woman looking to feel alive, or a woman slowly dying in a life that looked perfect from the outside? They wanted to watch, and we let them. And everything changed. So, if you've ever found yourself in a moment you couldn't explain, a moment that wasn't planned, but couldn't be stopped either, then stay. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, because this isn't just a story. It's a confession. And it starts right here. I used to think I had a normal marriage, until normal started to feel like loneliness, dressed up in routine. You know the kind, mornings where the silence over coffee is louder than any fight, evenings where the TV speaks more words than your husband. Nights where the touch has faded, but the presence remains, like a body without a soul. My husband, Mark, was never cruel. He didn't yell. He didn't cheat, at least, not in the way people define it. But he stopped seeing me. Not in the romantic sense. I mean really seeing me. Noticing the tired behind my smile. The pause in my laugh. The way I'd linger a second longer in the hallway just hoping for a touch, a glance, something. He worked late. He brought his laptop to bed. And on the rare nights he didn't, he brought his silence instead. I used to dress up just to catch his attention at dinner. Now I barely bothered brushing my hair. Because what's the point in shining when no one's looking? That's where I was when they moved in. Jake and Lila. A young couple, maybe 10 years younger than us. They moved into the house next door on a bright Sunday morning, all smiles and sunglasses and loud music playing from their car speakers as they unpacked. They were different from the rest of the neighborhood. Not stiff. Not formal. Not caught up in appearances. They laughed a lot, touched each other often, and they looked at people when they spoke, like they really wanted to hear the answer. The first time we met was over trash bins. Lila waved, full of energy, asking about recycling days. Jake stood behind her, shirtless, sun on his skin, flashing a confident grin like he already knew we'd be friends. At first, it was small things. A quick hello, passing by during evening walks, an occasional bottle of wine dropped off just because. Then it became more. They invited us over. Movie nights, card games, laughter that spilled into late hours. Their home was filled with candles, music, soft blankets, mismatched pillows. It didn't look like a magazine spread, it looked lived in. It looked warm. And God, I needed warm. It didn't take long before we were spending more time in their house than ours. Mark seemed lighter around them. He smiled more. Even touched my hand sometimes during conversations, as if being around Jake and Lila reminded him I existed. But here's the part one didn't expect. It wasn't Mark who felt like he was waking up. It was me. Jake had a way of looking at me just a second too long. Not inappropriate. Just curious. Like he saw something under the surface and wasn't afraid to look closer. Lila noticed everything. If I changed my nail color, she'd comment. If I looked tired, she'd ask gently, rough day? And sometimes when Mark wasn't in the room, she'd tilt her head and say, "You're too beautiful to look that sad." At first, I thought it was just her way, friendly, bold, unfiltered. But then, there were the glances, the touches that lingered. Jake's hand on the small of my back when he walked by me in the kitchen. Lila resting her head on my shoulder during a movie night. The way she'd stroke my arm and say, "You always smell so soft." It was subtle, but not forgettable. And Mark? He never said a word. Either he didn't notice, or he did and didn't care. That's what hurt the most, because part of me wanted him to care, to pull me aside, to ask what the hell was going on, to fight for me. But he didn't. He let the invitations continue. Let the nights stretch longer. Let the comfort of Jake and Lila become our new normal. And somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling guilty for enjoying their company more than his. I told myself it was innocent. Just four adults. Spending time together. Laughing. Drinking. Playing silly games on the floor like teenagers. But I could feel it, that slow slide toward something neither of us had the courage to name. There was a night. I'll never forget it. We were all on their couch. Too close, too warm, too many glasses of wine in. Lila was leaning into me. Jake was massaging Mark's shoulders, and everyone was laughing. And she whispered low, sultry, like it was meant to melt straight into my skin, "Have you ever wondered what it's like to be watched?" I laughed, nervously, shrugged it off like she was being playful. But her eyes didn't blink. Jake smiled from across the room. And Mark? He didn't say a thing. He just looked down at his drink and smirked. That was the first crack in the glass. The moment I realized we weren't four friends having wine anymore. We were walking towards something else. Something strange. Something thrilling. Something I wasn't sure I wanted, but couldn't stop thinking about. Jake and Lila were different. Open. Intense. Curious. And maybe, just maybe, we were too bored, too numb, too broken to notice the red flags waving in plain sight. Or maybe we did notice. Maybe we just didn't care. Because when you've spent so long in a room where no one's looking at you, sometimes it only takes one gaze to burn everything down. It was a Friday evening. The kind of night that should have felt normal easy. But even as we walked across the lawn toward Jake and Lila's place, I felt something was different. The air was thick, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Their house glowed warm through the windows, candles flickering, soft music playing, the kind of setting that makes you forget time exists. I remember the door opening before we even knocked. Lila stood there in a silk robe that barely covered her thighs, laughing like she'd been waiting for this moment all day. Jake, behind her, shirt undone, sleeves rolled casually up. 2 glasses of wine already in his hands. They welcomed us in like we were old lovers, not just neighbors. There was something in their energy that night, something looser, freer, almost like they were daring us not to notice. We settled into their oversized couch, the cushions swallowing us whole. Lila poured the wine. Jake brought out a tray of olives and dark chocolate, some combination, she claimed, woke up the senses. I should have known then. This wasn't about the wine. It never was. The conversation started like it always did, work, annoying neighbors, the latest streaming show. But then Lila curled her legs beneath her, sipped her drink slowly, and turned to my husband. Mark, she said with a smile, has anyone ever told you your voice is soothing? Her tone dipped on that last word, like it meant something else. I felt a flicker in my chest. Not jealousy. Not quite. Something else. Something heavier. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Mark chuckled, a little flustered. No, not really. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. Because I was already looking at him, watching how he reacted. And more than that, I was watching how he didn't mind. Jake was beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth from his body. He leaned in a bit too far as he reached for a grape, brushing my arm with the back of his hand. I didn't move away. I didn't say a word. And then it happened. Lila looked between all of us, let the silence stretch for a beat too long, then said, with a mischievous grin, "You ever wonder what it'd feel like to just watch?" The room went still for a second. Just long enough for me to realize she wasn't joking. Not really. Mark laughed. A low, polite kind of laugh that people give when they don't know if they should be offended or intrigued. Jake raised an eyebrow like he was waiting to see which direction the night would tilt. I laughed too. Too loudly. Too quickly. The kind of laugh that tries to bury discomfort in noise. But my skin burned. Not from shame, but from something else entirely. A kind of heat I hadn't felt in years. The kind of heat that doesn't come from being touched, but from being noticed. And I caught myself wondering, what would it be like? Not just to be watched, but to be seen. Really seen. Mark didn't flinch. Didn't throw a look my way. Didn't seem surprised or amused or even curious. He just smiled. That crooked, lazy smile I hadn't seen in months. The one he used to give me when we first met. When I was the only woman in the room. And in that moment, I stayed quiet. Because what could I say? That I missed this feeling? That being around Jake and Lila made me feel younger, wanted, alive? That a part of me liked the idea of someone watching? That I was starting to imagine what it might feel like to perform again. Not for the world. Not for Instagram. But for someone's undivided gaze? I told myself it was just a joke. Just a wild comment made under the influence of too much wine. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. And the worst part? I wasn't scared of that shift. I was curious. Later that night, when we walked back home in silence, Mark didn't say a word about what Lila said. He didn't ask me if it made me uncomfortable. He didn't mention how close Jake sat, or how Lila kept looking at me like she was waiting for a sign. He just slipped into bed beside me, turned off the light, and stared at the ceiling until I heard his breath go soft with sleep. But I stayed awake, eyes wide open, heart pounding. Not because I was afraid of what had happened, but because I was afraid of what I wanted to happen next. And I knew. We were already past the point of pretending. They wanted to watch. And part of me wanted to let them. Is it cheating if nothing happens? Or is it worse, to want it? That question haunted me in ways I didn't expect. It followed me through grocery aisles, while folding towels, even when Mark would reach for his keys in the morning, peck my cheek, and leave without ever really looking at me. Nothing had happened. Not really. But something had changed. I started thinking about Jake, too often. The way he looked at me, not like a man eyeing another man's wife, but like someone who saw the cracks in me and didn't look away. like someone who was curious about who I used to be before routine softened my edges. And Lila, she was no better. There was a hunger behind her compliments, a playfulness that never felt casual. Like she knew I was slowly unraveling, and she was willing to watch it happen thread by thread. I kept telling myself it was harmless, that we were adults, that people flirt, that wanting attention wasn't a crime. But I started changing in little ways. I'd spend more time getting ready before we went to their place, wearing that lip gloss Mark hadn't noticed in months, slipping on tops that hugged my waist tighter just in case Jake's eyes wandered. And they did. Oh, they did. I noticed the way Jake's gaze would drop when I reached for the wine bottle. How his fingers would graze mine longer than necessary. How Lila's compliments came with a smile that lingered, just a little too long. And I hated myself for liking it. But not enough to stop. Because suddenly, around them, I felt awake. It was like I'd been asleep for years and didn't know it until someone shook me gently and whispered, "There you are." Mark never noticed. Or if he did, he pretended not to. He still worked late. Still scrolled through his phone while I made dinner. Still gave me routine kisses that didn't taste like anything anymore. And so I found myself drifting further toward the very thing I swore I'd never entertain. Some nights, lying in bed next to Mark, I'd close my eyes and replay that evening in Jake and Lila's living room. The way their glances felt like touches. The way my husband had smiled at the suggestion like it was something he'd already considered. The way I didn't say no. Was that consent? Was that permission? Or was it surrender? Sometimes I'd stare at my reflection longer than I should, tilting my head, asking myself silently, "Who are you becoming?" But I never had the courage to answer. Because part of me liked her. This version of me that was wanted, seen, felt, even if it was only in someone else's gaze. I'd catch myself wondering if Lila's comment had been a joke or a proposal. And if it was a proposal, why didn't it scare me? I'd walk past their house and feel my heart flutter if I caught a glimpse of Jake mowing the lawn or Lila opening her blinds. I'd pretend it was coincidence, that I was just stretching my legs. But deep down, I knew I was hoping to be noticed. It wasn't about acting on anything. Not yet. It was about the rush. The possibility. The ache that came with imagining what if. What if we said yes? What if we stopped pretending? Some nights, I'd run my fingers through my hair before bed and wonder, if they were watching right now, would they like what they saw? Then I'd shake the thought out, disgusted with myself. Because I'm married. I chose this life. I built this home. And yet, that guilt never outweighed the thrill. It just sat there quietly, watching me fall inch by inch towards something I couldn't name. Was I a bad wife? Or just lonely? Was I craving something wrong? Or was I just trying to feel alive again? I'd like to believe there's a difference. That wanting isn't the same as doing. That longing doesn't make me a traitor. But late at night, when the house was still and I was the only one awake, I wasn't sure anymore. And that scared me more than anything. The second invitation came on a Wednesday. No excuse this time. No game night. No holiday. No birthday. Just a simple message from Lila that read, "Drinks tonight? Just us. No need to dress up unless you want to." With a winking emoji. I stared at that message longer than I should have. It wasn't what it said, it was how it felt. Like a soft knock on a door I hadn't fully closed. I showed it to Mark. He read it, nodded, and without even looking up said, "Sure. It's been a while." And that was it. No questions. No hesitation. Just, sure. That night, I didn't plan to dress up. But I did anyway. I picked the black top with the dipped neckline, the one I used to wear when Mark and I went dancing back when we still did things like that. I put on perfume. Not the one he liked, but the one I liked. The one that made me feel something. Alive. Feminine. Dangerous, maybe. When we arrived, their house was already dimly lit. Just candles and jazz. Jake opened the door, his smile easy, his shirt unbuttoned halfway down. Lila greeted us barefoot, wearing silk again, as if soft textures were her form of armor. There was no small talk. No chit-chat about work or the neighbors or the weather. Just laughter that felt a little too loose. And wine poured a little too full. We sat close. Closer than usual. The kind of close that made elbows touch and knees brush without apology. And then the conversation shifted. It started with Lila mentioning a documentary she'd seen, something about human desire. Apparently, she said, tracing the rim of her glass, watching someone can be more intimate than touching them. Mark didn't flinch, didn't shift uncomfortably or clear his throat. He just sipped his wine and asked, "How so?" Jake chimed in, his voice low and deliberate. "Because touching is obvious. But watching? That takes patience. Curiosity. Restraint." Lila leaned forward, eyes flicking between the two of us. You can learn a lot from what people let you see. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. I felt the wine burn a little deeper in my throat. And for a moment, I couldn't tell if we were talking about a documentary anymore. Or something else entirely. Mark gave a little smirk. The same one from the last time. The one that said, "I know, and I'm not stopping it." I felt my heart thudding in my chest. Not from fear. From adrenaline. There were no clear lines anymore. No one said the words. No one asked the question. But they didn't have to. After 2 glasses, Lila got up and changed the music, something slower, more sensual. Jake started asking about our first date, how we met, how long we'd been together. He asked questions that peeled layers back. Not about our relationship, but about me. What made me laugh? What kind of attention I missed? What I thought about fantasies couples didn't talk about out loud. I answered slowly, cautiously, but I didn't lie, and Mark never stopped me. I caught him watching me, yes, but not with disapproval. It was something else. Curiosity. Or maybe detachment. Like he wanted to see how far I'd go. We left around midnight. Not drunk. Not sober. Somewhere in the middle, where inhibitions bend just slightly. The walk home was quiet. Mark didn't reach for my hand, and I didn't offer mine. But when we got inside, I noticed something strange. Mark didn't close the curtains. I stood there for a moment, waiting. He turned to me, met my eyes, and without saying a word, walked upstairs. And I stayed. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain open. Just a little, just enough. Enough to be seen. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even an invitation. It was a whisper. A possibility. That night, when I changed into my nightgown and turned out the lights, I didn't sleep right away. I stood in the dark by the window, heartbeat heavy in my ears. And when I looked up, across the lawn, into the house with the soft golden lamp glowing faintly, they were there. Jake, Lila, standing by their window. Watching. No shame. No secrecy. Just watching. And I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't pretend. Because I knew we had all silently agreed. They didn't ask directly. They didn't have to. We left the curtains open. Just a sliver. Enough to be seen. Enough to pretend we didn't know what we were doing. But when I looked up, they were already watching. It was a Saturday night. Funny how ordinary that sounds, for something that would change everything. I remember the way the air felt, warm, still, like it was holding its breath. I'd spent too long picking out my dress. Not for Mark. Not even for myself. But for them. A low-cut silk slip, barely their straps, the kind of fabric that clings when you move too slow. I told myself it was just another evening. Just wine. Just company. But I knew better. Jake and Lila arrived just after 9, a bottle of red in one hand and a box of dark chocolate truffles in the other. They hugged us like usual, too close, too long. The lights were already dim. Candles flickering. Music low and sultry, more rhythm than melody, like a heartbeat in the background. Mark poured the wine. Jake handed me a glass and his fingers grazed mine, intentionally this time. There was no pretending anymore. We sat around the living room, laughter echoing off walls that had grown far too quiet for far too long. The couch felt smaller that night. Bodies closer, breaths shorter. Lila sat cross-legged beside me, tracing the rim of her glass with her fingertip, watching me, watching us. Jake leaned back, one arm casually draped across the backrest, his gaze heavy, unblinking. At first, it was just teasing. A comment here, a glance there. The kind of slow burn you feel in your stomach before you feel it anywhere else. Then Lila leaned in and whispered in my ear, her breath warm against my neck. What would happen if we didn't stop this time? And I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Or maybe I did. I glanced at Mark, expecting confusion or resistance. But all I saw was stillness. And something else. Not fear. Not hesitation. Just hunger. That look shook me. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it had been gone for so long. He didn't say a word. Just set down his glass and looked at me like I was already halfway gone. There were no rules anymore. No whispers. No pretending. Jake and Lila didn't move. They didn't touch. They didn't reach across any lines. They just sat in silence. And watched. And somehow, we let them. I felt the shift when Mark reached for me. Slow at first. Unsure. But when I didn't stop him, when I leaned in instead of pulling away, something broke. Not violently. Not loudly. But like glass cracking under pressure, slow, precise, inevitable. They watched. Unblinking. Jake's hand curled around Lila's thigh. Lila's nails dug into the couch cushion. But they never interfered. Never interrupted. They just observed. And we performed. It felt surreal. Like I wasn't inside my body anymore. Like I was floating somewhere above it all, watching myself do something I'd only ever imagined in the darkest corners of my mind. I should have felt shame. Should have recoiled. But I didn't. I felt exposed. Yes. But not in the way you feel when you're caught. It was the kind of exposure that felt deliberate. Like I wanted to be seen. For the first time in years. I needed to be seen. There was no turning back. No stopping to ask if this was right. The moment had swallowed all reason, all hesitation. Mark didn't speak. He didn't question. And I didn't look away. Because the truth? I wanted it. Not just the act, but the eyes. Their eyes. Their approval. Their attention. It was intoxicating. Wrong. Twisted. But it felt like breathing after holding it for too long. And when it was over, no one said a word. Lila stood and walked to the door like nothing had happened. Jake followed, nodding politely, that same slow smirk playing on his lips. They left. No promises. No shame. Just silence. I sat there, legs trembling, heart thudding in my throat. Mark looked at me, not with judgment. Not with regret. Just emptiness. As if the act had filled something temporary, but hollowed out something deeper. And me? I stared at the door they had just walked through, feeling every second of what we had just allowed, every beat of what had been crossed. And still, I didn't look away. The next morning, the silence was deafening. Not the kind that comforts. The kind that presses in on your chest and makes the air harder to breathe. Mark got out of bed before I did. He didn't say anything, just moved like everything was normal. Brushed his teeth. Made coffee. Checked his emails. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, half expecting the weight of the night before to crash down like a wave. But it didn't. There were no fights. No accusations. No awkward stares. No apologies. We never talked about it. Not once. Like silence would erase it. Like pretending it hadn't happened made it easier to carry. But it didn't. That day, I walked through the house like I was moving through someone else's life. Everything looked the same, the photos on the wall. The laundry basket full of clothes I hadn't folded. The coffee cup still on the counter from last night. But I didn't feel the same. I felt like a version of myself had been peeled away, exposed, rearranged, redefined. I avoided the windows, avoided looking toward their house. But part of me still listened for footsteps, voices, laughter. When I finally stepped outside later that afternoon, just to take out the trash, I saw Lila watering her plants like nothing had happened. She waved, just like she always did. Too normal. Too easy. Jake was there, too, sitting on their porch, reading a book like he hadn't just sat across from us, watching. He looked up, gave a lazy nod, then went right back to reading. Like the night before had been as routine as brushing teeth. That scared me. Because if they could carry on like that, if we could, what did that say about us? What had we become? Later that night, I brought it up, in the smallest way I could. I said, that was intense, wasn't it? Mark didn't even look up from his laptop. He just said, yeah. And that was it. Yeah. No discussion. No processing. No, what does this mean? Just, yeah. Almost like he was open to doing it again. Almost like he wanted to. And suddenly, I wasn't sure what bothered me more, what we did, or how comfortable he seemed with it. I began to look at him differently. Not with blame, but with confusion. Was he ever really the man I thought he was? Or had he just been waiting for someone else to unlock this side of him? Or maybe I was the one who changed. Maybe I'd been waiting for permission to become this version of myself. Because I started to change. I felt it. Not on the outside. Not yet. But inside. In the way I looked at myself. Like I was being edited. By their eyes. Their approval. Their attention. Their gaze. And I started to ask myself, who was I really doing it for? Was it for Mark? To reignite something that had long since gone cold? Was it for Jake and Lila? To feel wanted? Desired? Or was it for me? Because for the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not in control, exactly. But present. Like I could see myself again, in a way I hadn't since before marriage stripped me of mystery. But that feeling came with a cost. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw two women. The one who stood beside her husband with her hand in his. And the one who sat in a candlelit room, being watched, and liking it. And I didn't know which one was more real. Or more dangerous. So I stopped wearing certain things around the house. Stopped initiating conversation. Because I didn't trust what might come out of my mouth. I didn't know how to be casual with Mark anymore. Not after what we'd done. Not after what we'd allowed. We started sleeping on opposite sides of the bed again. The space between us growing, thick with unspoken questions neither of us wanted to ask. We didn't fight. We didn't cry. We didn't process. We just drifted. Like two boats. Slowly floating away from a shared shore. And every night, as I turned out the lights, I wondered, was this the beginning of something new? Or the end of everything we used to be? I wanted to feel desired. But now I feel dissected. Picked apart by eyes that saw too much and maybe never really saw me at all. And now that the thrill has faded, what's left is this strange, aching hollowness. Like something sacred was handed over in exchange for a feeling that didn't last long enough. And the part one can't stop thinking about is how much I welcomed it. I wanted to be wanted. So desperately. So deeply. And for one night, I got what I thought I needed. But at what cost? Because now I look in the mirror and I don't know who's looking back. She's not a stranger. She's just someone I don't quite trust anymore. And I wonder, was this all really about Mark's distance? Or had I already been slipping away long before Jake and Lila moved in? Maybe it's easier to blame the silence in our marriage. Easier to say he drifted first. But what if I'd been hiding too? Behind routines, behind resentment, behind makeup and motherhood and the mask of being fine? What if this need to be seen was something I never gave myself permission to ask for? Jake looked at me in a way Mark hadn't in years. That much is true. But did he really see me? Or just the version of me I performed for him? And that gaze. God, it still haunts me. Because even now, days later, I catch myself searching for it. In reflections. In shadows. In every sideways glance through the window when I know he might be standing there. It's not about love. It never was. It was about validation. About feeling alive. But I can't tell if that makes it better or worse. And Mark. He hasn't brought it up. Not once. And that silence? It screams louder than any argument. I don't know what terrifies me more, that he's pretending it didn't happen, or that he's okay that it did. I keep wondering if he agreed that night because a part of him wanted it too, or if he just didn't care enough to stop it. And if it's the second one, what does that say about us? About me? I thought we crossed that line together. But now, in the quiet, it feels like I crossed it alone. And I can't help but ask, was it betrayal if we both agreed? Or was it something worse? Was it betrayal of self? Because I didn't do this for Mark. Not really. And I didn't do it with him, either. He was there, yes. But it was me I was trying to reclaim. The girl I used to be. The woman I wanted to become again. The one who used to walk into a room and feel like she belonged in her own skin. But all I did was trade invisibility for exposure. And now, every time I close my eyes, I can still feel their gaze. Their curiosity. Their hunger. And mine. And I don't know which version of me I miss more, the one who was starving for attention, or the one who knew how to survive without it. Have you ever done something? Not because it made sense. Not because it was safe. But just to feel wanted again? To feel like you mattered. Like someone saw you, in a world that had stopped noticing. I keep asking myself, was I wrong for letting it happen? Or was I just a woman trying not to disappear? I didn't wake up one day and decide to cross a line. I didn't plan the whispers, the whine, the glances that lingered too long. It all just built quietly, slowly, until one day, I wasn't watching the edge anymore. I was stepping off it, and now here I am, still wondering if what I did was unforgivable or just inevitable. Tell me in the comments, was this betrayal? Or just two broken people trying to feel alive in the only way they knew how? If stories like this stir your heart, if they leave you breathless, haunted, or questioning the parts of yourself you don't talk about, like this video, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We unravel the parts of you no one sees. Some moments, live on in the spaces between breaths. They don't scream. They whisper. In the softest silence. When the room goes quiet. When the dishes are done and the lights are out and your heart starts remembering the things your mind tried to forget. What we let them see. They never forgot. And neither did we. We didn't speak of it again. We just moved on. Or tried to. But something stayed. In the air. In the way Mark looked at me. In the way I avoided my own reflection. Loneliness. It wears many masks. It can look like routine. It can sound like laughter. It can dress itself up as consent, as freedom, as curiosity. But when you let someone else define your worth, when you hand over your need to be seen, you stop being a person. You become a mirror. A reflection of their desire, their attention, not your truth. And when the attention fades, what's left? This was our choice. Yes, but not every choice is meant to be remembered. Some are meant to remind us, to warn us, to break us, just enough to finally begin again. And now, as I sit in the same house, with the same wall,